Why was England seemingly okay with female monarchs as opposed to other countries? Right. So that's I took something similar uh, in one of the recent episodes, didn't I? It was about how the status of women changed in Europe after the imposition of Christianity on the people of Europe. And the status of women changed drastically once Christianity became the dominant religion in Europe. So before Christianity, the women of Europe had significant rights and privileges in society. They were healers, they were uh, teachers, they were decision makers. They could own property, they could initiate various legal proceedings, they could initiate divorce, they could keep their dowry and pass it on to their descendants the way they wanted, they could even rule. So all of these rights and privileges were available to the women of Europe before the imposition of Christianity. And once Christianity was imposed, it was like a 180-degree turnaround for women. Women lost essentially all rights. They became property. They became like non-persons in European society. It was said, there was a legal principle that said that the husband and the woman and the wife are the same person, and that person is the husband. So women became non-persons. Women became erased from society in Europe after the imposition of Christianity. And yet you have this phenomenon in England. In England, that you have female monarchs. So what's the deal? How did that happen is the question. Very interesting question. Let's so have you heard of something called the Salic Law? Let's Google it so that you get the point of what I'm trying to say. There was something called Salic Law, Salic. Salic. All right, let's check it out. What is the Salic Law? Right. So, also known as the Salian Law. Let's take a look at what Wikipedia has to say about this. So Wikipedia is super Eurocentric, so it's going to give you a proper understanding of what Salic Law is, also known as Salian Law. It was an ancient Frankish civil law code compiled around 500 AD by whoever, Clovis the First, and so on. It remained the basis of Frankish law throughout the early medieval period and influenced future European legal systems. The best known tenet of the old law is the principle of exclusion of women from inheritance of thrones, fiefs, and other property. The exclusion of women from the inheritance of thrones, fiefs, and other property. Right, so it disenfranchises women, and the Salic Law was adopted by Europe, and that's why in Europe you would not find any female ruler. So in various European kingdoms, etc., if a king died without leaving a male heir, then the next king would be chosen from somebody in his male along the male lineage. So maybe a nephew of his, or some male relative, the closest male relative who is fit to be on the throne, that sort of thing. And that's how the next king would be generally chosen, based on that principle. But no female descendant of a king would ever be allowed to rule, with very few exceptions in Europe, right? So that was the deal in Europe. But and this became it became a core principle, especially in the French monarchy and other European monarchies around the 14th, 15th centuries AD. Okay, so that is Salic Law. But now in England, things were different. First of all, you had this great, fantastic king called Henry VIII. Fantastic guy, outstanding, brilliant guy. He imagined that he was a world conqueror, etc. He imagined he was the center of the world. Very interesting character. And he I don't know how many ladies he married, at least 4 or 5 ladies. More than half of them had their heads chopped off eventually for the sake of expediency, more than anything else. Anne Boleyn is an example. So Henry, what he craved was a male child. But when he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn, he was already married to Catherine of Aragon, and he wanted the Pope to annul his marriage based on some flimsy, completely made up excuses. But the Pope was unwilling to annul the marriage, and that's why what Henry VIII did was incredible. He broke off from the Vatican. He broke off his allegiance. He severed his allegiance to the Catholic Church, and he set up his own Church of England, the Anglican Church, which still is the main church, is the basic overall Church of England today, the Anglican Church. So he broke off from that, and that started off a chain of events that eventually led to England becoming the most powerful nation on the world for in the world for quite some time. Eventually, so that's where it all starts. So Henry craved a male child. Catherine of Aragon could not produce a male child. She gave him Princess Mary, but no male child. Then he had a mistress who gave him a male child, but the male child died. Then he married Anne Boleyn, but Anne Boleyn again could not produce a male child. She gave him Elizabeth, Princess Elizabeth, and so on. Eventually, he married Jane Seymour, who produced a male child, but that male child died very young. I think in his early teens or something. You can look up the exact details. So, because Henry was left with no male children, he therefore decided that instead of passing on the throne to some distant relative or whatever, I'm going to pass it on to my daughters. So he structured his succession such that his first successor would be his eldest daughter, Mary. And in case she could not continue for whatever reason, or passed away, or did not leave behind any male children, then the throne would pass on to his second daughter, Elizabeth. Right? So after Henry VIII dies tragically, his daughter, there was this small little episode of Lady Jane Grey, who they tried to install on the throne. She ended up with her head severed from severed from her body. Her ghost still haunts the Tower of London, apparently. That's a digression. So after Henry dies, there's this little brief interlude of Lady Jane Grey, and then Mary, his daughter Mary, becomes the Queen of England. And that's because England did not follow Salic Law. So Mary became the Queen of England, and she was not opposed to any significant extent by the nobility, etc. So she became the Queen of England, and she ruled for for a reasonable amount of time. And history has given her the title of Bloody Mary, because she tried to undo everything her father did, and she tried to restore the Catholic faith and all that, and she did all kinds of terrible things, burned lots of people at the stake alive, and she also eventually dies, and that's when Elizabeth becomes the queen. So first you have this one queen, that is Mary, Bloody Mary, and then you have her half sister Elizabeth, who becomes the queen, and that's the start of the golden age of England, the Elizabethan age, that ends around 1600 AD roughly. You can look up the exact dates, which is the beginning of the English colonization, the very initial steps of the English colonization, occupation rather, of India. So because the English did not follow Salic Law, that's why they were okay with female monarchs. So once you have the precedent that's set, first with Mary and then with Elizabeth, who turns out to be such a brilliant ruler, it's hard to then argue against a female ruler ruling England. So one of the reasons why a female ruler was not regarded as a good thing, apart from the Christian angle, etc., is that because the royal families in Europe, they would marry among each other. So typically, a king's daughter would be married to some prince from another country. And if the king's daughter becomes the queen, then her husband, who is a foreigner, suddenly has incredible influence in the running of the country, which is not necessarily always a good thing. So that's one reason why it was not seen as as prudent to have a female ruler. And if you look at Queen Elizabeth II, well, her husband has significant German ancestry. Her mom, was it Victoria, most likely? She also, there's a lot of German ancestry today in the English royalty, because they allowed they allowed female monarchs to rule the country. So that was the deal, and I hope this explains why England was okay with female monarchs as opposed to other countries, because they did not follow Salic Law, despite being Christian and all that. All right.